This is Nightly Business Report with Tyler Matheson and Susie Garrett. Brought to you by...
Sailing through the heart of historic cities and landscapes on a river, you get close to iconic landmarks, to local life, to cultural treasures. Viking River Cruises, exploring the world in comfort.
Jobs in America. Attention turns to Friday's employment report and what a strong or weak number could mean for the economy, Fed policy, and your investments.
Mandate delayed. The business community, from restaurants to retailers, react to the delay of a key provision in the new healthcare law.
And turmoil in Egypt. The unrest there is impacting oil markets here. We've got a report from the center of it all, Cairo. All that and more tonight on Nightly Business Report for Wednesday, July 3rd.
Good evening, everyone. The job market is looking better tonight. Just the kind of encouraging news Americans like to hear as they gear up for barbecues and fireworks. American businesses hired 188,000 workers in June. That was more than expected, according to payroll firm ADP. Now, most of the new hiring came from construction and small businesses. This could be a good sign for the Labor Department's employment report that comes out on Friday. It's an important number that investors will be watching closely. If it's a strong one, it could impact changes in Federal Reserve policy, growth in the U.S. economy, and the stock market.
And joining us now to talk more about jobs and what he expects from that June report that comes out on Friday, Bruce Kasman, chief economist at J.P. Morgan. Mr. Kasman, welcome. Great of you to join us today. What is the kind of number that you're looking for? We had the ADP report out today that was a little higher than some people thought it might come in at. What are you looking for Friday?
We're looking for 150,000 on the payroll count, and I think that would solidify the message that jobs are continuing to grow here, but it's growing at a slower pace. I think that's also consistent with an economy that really hasn't shaken out of that 2% pace of growth overall. And so we think the economy is sluggish, jobs are okay, and it's going to make the Fed's decision as it moves towards the September, I think, point at which it'll think about tapering pretty tough.
Bruce, besides the headline number, what else is important in this report? We know that each of these employment reports are so critical to Fed policy and to investors, but is there any key element that you're going to be really looking for?
Well, there's always a lot of stuff. I think first and foremost beyond the job count is the unemployment rate, and looking at the unemployment rate from the point of view of jobs versus labor supply. We're certainly hoping that there's better news again after last month's report on labor supply that keeps us feeling their workers entering the workforce. I think after that, you want to look at the composition. We had a very weak service sector survey from the ISM today. We want to see that service sector jobs, which have been a bright spot this year, continue to hold up. That would be a concern if it didn't. And then I think you look at the income side, which is always important to see how labor income, that has to do with the work week, it has to do with the wage number alongside the job gains.
You know, Bruce, a moment ago you said that your prediction was 150,000 payroll jobs added in the most recent month, and that would make it very difficult for the Fed to begin pulling back from its stimulus in September. I don't mean to put words in your mouth, though I'm often accused of doing that better than anything else I do, but I assume that that's a kind of Goldilocks number then, not too hot, not too cold, that would be good news for the stock market.
I think generally speaking, yes, although I never try to be too precise in understanding where the market's going. You know, I think 150,000 is an okay number. It's not where we want to be. It's not where the Fed wants us to be. But it's certainly not the kind of slipping we saw in both the spring of 2011 and 2012, where it did look like businesses are pulling back. So I think you're right. It's somewhere in the middle. I think certainly for the economy point of view, over time, I think we'd like to see stronger job growth, stronger growth overall, and we'd like to see a Fed tapering in response to that strength. So I think overall strength would be good here, but certainly the response that people would expect from the Fed has and will continue to put jitters through the market.
You just said you want to see stronger job growth. Everybody wants to see more people getting jobs. It's good for the economy. What's taking so long? We report every night about how auto sales are doing better, housing, construction, retail. How much more do we need to really get companies hiring again?
Well, I think you're making an interesting point. We're seeing pretty strong news in the auto industry. We're seeing pretty strong news in housing and construction. But I think we're being held back here by a fiscal drag that is still pretty intense. I think we're being held back up by a global economy that is still pretty weak. And the balance of this is giving us something which is, I guess I'd call it lackluster, nothing terrible, but nothing exciting. We'd like to see things move better, and there's hope that the drags, at least on the fiscal side, will fade. But that's still a forecast. It doesn't look like where we are right now.
Bruce, thank you so much for joining us on this holiday shortened trading day, and have a good 4th of July.
Thank you.
And that was Bruce Kasman, economist at J.P. Morgan. And still ahead on the program, why do American businesses complain about a shortage of skilled workers, even though so many people are looking for work? We'll look at what's being done about that.
Well, traders worked a short day on Wall Street today, with the markets closing early ahead of the 4th of July holiday. And today's session proved one thing: jobs matter more than just about anything else. Those encouraging data about jobs we told you about at the top of the program were enough to lift stocks today. The sweet ADP numbers counteracted a U.S. trade deficit that soured by $5 billion in May to $45 billion. The market also pushed past a measure of services that was the weakest since February of 2010, and the turmoil in Portugal and Egypt, which sent oil prices higher. We will get to Egypt and those rising crude prices in just a moment. Meantime, as for stocks, the Dow added 56 points, the Nasdaq was up 10, and the S&P 500 gained a point.
More now on oil prices that Tyler was just talking about. They are now at the highest level in 14 months, $101.24 a barrel, up $1.64 today. Investors and traders bid up prices on growing worries about a disruption of crude supplies from the Middle East because of the political uncertainty in Egypt. The issue here, Egypt controls the Suez Canal, one of the region's busiest shipping lanes. For the latest out of Egypt at mid-evening in Cairo, Youssef Gamal-Adin filed this report.
Another day of protests calling on President Mohamed Morsi to step down after just 1 year in power. A deadline set by the military, 48 hours, expired earlier today for the government to figure things out. And that would have included a power-sharing deal with the opposition. That didn't materialize. What happened then? The military is sitting down with leaders from the political scene, from the religious scene, and national leaders to come up with a roadmap. In the meantime, the government put out a statement on President Mohamed Morsi's official Facebook page saying it is dangerous to undermine the legitimacy of a freely elected government, and that progress had to be made in terms of reconciling with the opposition. But that shows you again how the military is moving further and further apart from the incumbent government, raising the risks and the stakes for Egypt and for everybody else watching around the world. Of course, there's a heightened state of alert for the army. Tanks have been moving into various parts of the city, not necessarily in large scale, but quite selectively, and we'll just have to see how it all plays out. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Youssef Gamal-Adin in Cairo.
And that report from Youssef is his latest filing, and it's just a reminder that the situation in Egypt is fluid. Things are changing minute by minute.
The administration decision announced late yesterday to delay key provisions of the Affordable Care Act, known informally as Obamacare, hit with the force of a thunderclap in political and business circles. Bertha Coombs explains what the delay means for employers, employees, and the future of the law.
Groups like the National Retail Federation have been raising the red flag for months about employer mandate regulations under the Affordable Care Act. But the Obama administration's decision to delay it took NRF's Neil Trautwein by surprise. Still, he calls it a realistic move.
I think it was evident the administration wasn't ready, we weren't ready, and weren't going to be ready in time for this to take off in October when the exchanges start enrolling people, and then January when the exchanges are supposed to open their door.
Restaurants and retailers with more than 50 full-time employees are the businesses that have been feeling the most pressure to comply with the mandate or face fines starting at $2,000 per worker for failing to do so. Some haven't offered insurance in the past, but the NRF believes many will continue with coverage plans already on the books for 2014, though some may opt to offer plans with fewer rich benefits than mandated under ACA. Insurers should see little impact on enrollment, says Pollywog's Les Funtlater.
What it does, though, is brings back to the fore the uncertainty that we have around Obamacare and Affordable Care Act.
It's the second time the Obama administration has relented on a key part of its signature health reform measure. coming months after pushing back part of the small business insurance marketplace on the federal health exchanges for 1 year as well.
You've seen two small changes here, and the next step is to come to the conclusion by the Obama administration that they're not ready to operate the federal exchanges on the individual side.
Susquehanna's Chris Riggs says the implications would be very negative if the administration were to delay the individual mandate requiring Americans to be insured.
That would be a major problem or concern for the insurance industry, because then you'd be subject to adverse selection where only the sickest people get the insurance through the exchanges next year, but those that are healthy will probably opt out.
Because the stakes are so high, analysts don't see the administration putting the individual mandate on hold. But the clock is ticking, with ACA open enrollment set to begin in less than 3 months. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Bertha Coombs.
Let's hear more now from Neil Trotwine of the National Retail Federation about the impact of this delay on American businesses. Neil, what did you hear from your membership today? I mean, what are they going to do next now that they have this extension?
Well, I think first they're going to take a deep breath and reevaluate where they are. This announcement last night both surprised and pleased us. You know, I think there is a sense that we were careering towards a deadline, and I think there was some danger that that we were going to get sideways on this. So I think we're very encouraged.
Put into perspective for me, if you would, Neil, the number of businesses that were going to be affected by this employer mandate and now won't be. As I understand it, something like 97% of all businesses in the country have fewer than 50 employees anyhow, and most of the businesses above 50 employees, full-time employees that is, already provide insurance. So what number of businesses are we talking about?
Well, it's actually a large percentage of the employees are in those larger than 50 employee groups. You know, we have a lot of members that are in that small mom and pop range as well, but they still had to report to the exchange all the information that is so troublesome in today's announcement, or yesterday's announcement. But really the challenge is not, it's the sufficiency of coverage. Even though many firms have offered coverage before, it's often not as comprehensive as the Affordable Care Act will require. And there's a real question about the relative size of employer contribution to individual employee income. There's a second penalty under the ACA that penalizes when it passes a certain income threshold. So I think this is of broad concern to a wide swath of the business community. Certainly the retail industry and the chain restaurant industries that I represent have been very worried about this, and it's introduced an element of uncertainty into expansion plans.
And when you talk about uncertainty, it goes beyond just these businesses who have to deal with this new legislation. I mean, we hear that individuals are still very confused. A lot of these exchanges are not set up yet. Bertha was just saying in that package, talking about whether or not this individual mandate might have to be postponed. You're very much in touch with everything going on with this bill. What do you think? Is that the next extension that we're going to be hearing about?
I kind of doubt it. I think this was a big step for the administration to take to postpone the employer responsibility mandate regime. I think to go that extra mile, not to open up the exchanges for individuals, you might see a compliance light sort of an approach on the individual side, but I think they will try to enroll individuals, and they have already encouraged employers to continue to provide and expand offering to employees.
All right, Neil, thank you so much for coming on and sharing all this information with us.
Well, thank you.
Neil Trotwine, Vice President of the National Retail Federation.
And coming up, Back to the Future. Can Google's Motorola Mobility, the first brand of the cell phone era, shake up the smartphone market now? But first, a look at how some of the most widely held stocks closed today. As we mentioned earlier, events in Egypt are very fluid, and now Egypt's military chief says the president, Morsi, has been replaced by the Chief Justice of the Constitutional Court. He also says that the Constitution has been suspended, the Islamist-backed Constitution, and says a new cabinet will soon be formed. There is a new, or more accurately, a newly rejuvenated player in the smartphone wars, and it's got a familiar name. But now Motorola, or more precisely Motorola Mobility, the original phone maker, is owned by Google. And the search giant has just fired the opening salvo aimed at luring customers away from Apple and Samsung devices. John Ford has more now.
Call it a shot across the bow of the smartphone industry. Google, through its subsidiary Motorola, putting America on notice that a groundbreaking new phone is coming. The full-page ad ran in this morning's New York Times, USA Today, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post. It takes full advantage of the holiday. It's a tease. We don't see the phone, which the company has hinted will come this month or next. What we do see? The biggest brand of the internet era trying to resurrect the first brand of the cell phone era.
So if you're Google Motorola, I think the first most important thing is you need to have a fantastic product out the door. Consumers are very unforgiving when it comes to technology. You have one shot to get it right.
It started with Motorola.
At a conference in May, Motorola CEO Dennis Woodside said the new phone will be more self-aware than other phones. It'll know when it's in your pocket, maybe when you want to take a picture. It will face tough competition from two of the most dominant companies in tech, Samsung and Apple. Apple's next iPhone, maybe multiple models, expected within 3 months with new software.
This is what matters.
There's a bit of a marketing face-off here, too. Apple last month put out an ad touting its designed in California signature. Not everyone is impressed. The commercial mostly features people in everyday situations using Apple products in slow motion. In a way, the ad harkens back to the Think Different campaign that signaled Apple's rebirth when Apple tried to reintroduce itself to the world.
Here's to the crazy ones, the Think Different campaign. That is something we think of as typically Apple. I mean, the celebration of the crazy ones, for example, the whole different drummer kind of theme. I don't see anything in this new campaign. There are a bunch of people who seem to be enjoying Apple products in a number of contexts, and pretty cliched contexts at that.
This time, it's Google and Motorola who are trying to get people to think different. Since in the smartphone era, thinking the same probably means they'll buy from Apple or Samsung. For Nightly Business Report, I'm John Fort in San Jose.
Employees at Facebook apparently made so much money from the company's initial public stock offering last year that San Mateo County, where they live and work, is now the richest in America. The Labor Department says residents in the California county made an average of $3,240 a week during the fourth quarter of last year. That rounds out to about $168,000 a year, more than residents in Manhattan, which is the nation's second highest paid county.
Well, to market focus now on a short trading day. Alcoa led the Dow losers as J.P. Morgan cut its rating on that company to neutral from overweight because of weak prices for aluminum. Shares touched a 4-year low. Alcoa launches the second quarter earnings season on Monday, and we will speak with the CEO after those numbers are released. Now, at the close, Alcoa was down more than 1% at $7.71. Mead Johnson, the children's nutrition firm, led the S&P 500 losers today as China probes whether baby formula companies conspired to fix prices. Other companies involved, Abbott Labs, Nestle's, and Danone, but Mead Johnson down the most on the report, losing more than 8% on 7 times usual volume. It closed at $68.85.
AutoNation, a big gainer today, thanks to revved-up car sales. It reported new vehicle sales up 5% in June and 7% for the second quarter. AutoNation is the country's largest seller of new and used cars. The stock rose more than 1.5% today to close at $45.27. So far this year, shares are up 14%. And Chipotle Mexican Grill was the biggest gainer in the S&P 500 after Argus Research increased its target price to $430 a share. Chipotle was up nearly 3.5% today, closing at $384 and change.
Creating jobs has been an ongoing challenge in the U.S., to put it mildly, especially in the manufacturing sector. But as Steve Leisman tells us, there's a company in North Carolina that's trying to change all that, and in the process, it's challenging the economics of a traditional education.
Charlotte is best known as a fast-growing southern city that is home to NASCAR and some of the nation's biggest banks. What it's probably not known at all for is the 200 German companies, including Siemens, who call the city home and are on the cutting edge of helping solve an American economic problem. Why, with the unemployment rate so high, the nation suffers from a lack of skilled workers.
This little-known connection between Germany, Charlotte, and the rest of the Carolinas brings together government, business, education, and technology. And it's helping spark a resurgence in manufacturing in this country.
With more than 1 million square feet under roof, this is Siemens' biggest manufacturing plant in North America, building steam and gas turbines used to generate electricity. At a time when manufacturing employment is challenged in the U.S., this plant has doubled the number of jobs in the past 2 years, up to 1,550. But that's easier said than done.
There's plenty of good people that have basic skills. It's just that we don't have them trained in the modern advanced manufacturing skills that we need for today.
That's where the German connection comes in. These companies brought over with them from Germany their apprenticeship program and connected with local community colleges like Central Piedmont to train their workers, old style.
They have a proven system for over a couple of thousand years called an apprenticeship system. And they focus on helping students determine what it is they want to do in their career early on.
I'm learning how to run the machines.
18-year-old Rebecca Espinal joined the 3-year program as a senior in high school. After 2 years in the program, that includes working with mentors, she'll have an associate degree and a guaranteed job. It costs about $170,000 to train workers like Espinal. She is one of about 15 in the program, including 3 veterans. Public funds pay part of the cost, Siemens pays the rest. At the end, the company gets a skilled worker and Espinal gets a job, which can be tough for graduates in today's economy. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Steve Leisman.
And coming up on the program, after a rough few years, a demand for private planes is taking off. But is the industry about to hit some turbulence? But first, here's a check on how commodities, treasuries, and currencies fare today. The planned merger of American Airlines and U.S. Airways, which could create the world's biggest carrier, is now facing an antitrust suit. The lawsuit was filed in San Francisco on behalf of 40 consumers. It claims that the combined airline would lead to fewer flights, reduced service to smaller cities, a lower overall quality of service, and higher ticket prices. It also says the merger means 4 airlines, United, Delta, Southwest, and the new American Airlines, would control 90% of all domestic flights.
Well, if traveling on board commercial airlines is not exactly your taste, it's expensive, it's not so attractive, you can always do what tens of thousands of other Americans do, and that is fly their own planes. And as Jane Wells shows us, the business of private airplane ownership is taking off fast.
We only need a 40-foot hangar to put this airplane in.
The private airplane business appears to be taking off.
I've been looking at planes for about a year, and I actually don't have my pilot's license, so I want to get the plane that I'm going to fly.
We actually have our biggest backlog that we've had since 2007.
General aviation aircraft can range in price from $130,000 to $65 million, but the industry says global sales fell during the recession from nearly $25 billion to less than $19 billion.
Now, we went through some pretty difficult years, but Cirrus has been a very innovative company. We've not sat on our laurels continuing to build the airplane the same way we did just 5 or 6 years ago.
But 2 years ago, Minnesota-based Cirrus was bought by a Chinese government-owned aviation company, which infused it with cash. Cirrus began hiring and innovating.
You don't get claustrophobic.
Cirrus's new plane has a 65-foot in diameter parachute, which can be deployed for emergency landings and has been credited with saving 70 lives. A new 7 to 8 passenger light jet is scheduled for later this year. Overall, sales of general aviation aircraft globally in the first quarter showed a market improvement, according to the industry. The number of planes shipped jumped 10% from a year ago, and billings took off 32% to $4.6 billion. Cessna is the current global leader in the number of general aviation planes sold, while Bombardier brings in the most dollars. But aviation consultant Michael Boyd says it's not all clear skies. Buying a plane is one thing, keeping it is another.
We see about 30,000 recreational airplanes, from small jets on down to Piper Cubs, coming out of the system over the next 5 years simply because of cost and fuel and other things.
Add to that hopes by the president to reduce tax breaks for private planes used for business, and the flight plan for growth could hit turbulence, just as it was starting to regain altitude. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Jane Wells.
And finally tonight, the Statue of Liberty, closed since Superstorm Sandy flooded Liberty Island back in October, will reopen to the public tomorrow, just in time to celebrate the 4th of July. Officials are bracing for big crowds to visit the monument. That's because it had been closed for more than a year to make repairs and reopened just a day before that storm hit. And for a woman who's nearly 127 years old, Lady Liberty looks pretty good, doesn't she, Tyler?
Always does, always does.
And that's Nightly Business Report for tonight. I'm Susie Garrow. Thanks for watching.
And I'm Tyler Matheson. Thanks from me as well. We will be here tomorrow night for a special July 4th edition of Nightly Business Report. We hope you'll join us. Have a great evening, everybody.
Nightly Business Report has been brought to you by sailing through the heart of historic cities and landscapes on a river. You get close to iconic landmarks, to local life, to cultural treasures. Viking River Cruises, exploring the world in comfort.
I'm Susie Garrow with a Nightly Business Report news brief. American businesses hired a more than expected 188,000 new workers in June, mostly in construction and at small businesses. And first-time jobless claims fell last week by 5,000. That offset a $45 billion U.S. trade deficit in May. In a short trading session on Wall Street today, the Dow added 56 points, the Nasdaq was up 10, and the S&P 500 added 1 point. Concerns about the political turmoil in Egypt disrupting oil supplies out of the Mideast sent crude prices to a fresh 14-month high, closing above $101 a barrel. A lawsuit that was filed to stop the proposed merger of American Airlines and U.S. Airways on fears of higher ticket prices and fewer flights. Be sure to tune into Nightly Business Report right here on your public television station.